Hello everyone. This video is going to provide you with some strategies on how to integrate outside source material. What I mean by outside source material is essentially any outside sources or texts that have been written by another author, or let's say if it was a speaker or audio, anything that you are going to incorporate into your own writing that is not yours. We have different methods that we use in academic writing in order to properly integrate outside sources, and we're going to talk about that here through this video. So first, what does it mean to integrate sources? Well, for academic purposes, more often than not, you are going to be conducting research, and what we mean by research is essentially seeking out outside information for the purpose of achieving a specific goal. So whether that is to provide commentary, analysis, interpretation, and again, to think about the beam model and how and why we might actually integrate some of those outside sources. So if you don't know what I mean by the beam model, please be sure to visit the body paragraph development, where there is a full discussion about how to integrate information using the rhetorical approach. Integrating sources is a process in that it is not simply I'm going to go out, find some information that looks good, sounds good, I'm just going to put it in my paper. That is often not the effective way that we do that. So I am going to discuss the three key concepts to consider as you integrate sources. And through that process of talking about those three different facets, I'm going to get into a bit about summary, paraphrase, and direct quotation. Now, do keep in mind that there are additional layers to these topics, but it will be your job to seek out additional information outside of this that should a experience that you have that doesn't touch upon these topics, then you might have to consult the library. Remember that integrating sources also includes using a specific format, whether that is APA, MLA, Chicago style. For the sake of this class, we will be looking at MLA integration, and that will be using the 8th edition. So if you are watching this video and you are seeking alternate ways, say APA or another format, this might not be the video for you. Let's go ahead and begin. So when we think about integrating sources, we have to consider the why aspect, right? So what's our purpose? What are we trying to achieve through the thesis statement? And as I said before, the rhetorical method using the beam model, in that, are we trying to use this outside source for background information, for exhibits, which often includes things like evidence, which includes things like interpretation, analysis? Are we trying to use it for argumentative purposes, which often includes a need to provide hardcore evidence such as statistics, proof, something that you want to argue against, something that you want to validate? So depending on your purpose and why you're trying to integrate that source, that will dictate the kind of language that you use in order to actually incorporate that source into your writing. So we often look at three different ways in which we do this. So this is done often through summary, paraphrase, and direct quotation. I'm going to talk about each one of those briefly. And again, as I said before, sometimes they are a little bit more complex than as may be presented here. So please be sure that if you have additional questions, that you consult the textbook or that you consult the online library for more information. One of the analogies that we like to use is the burger, and Graf and Birkenstein talk about that as well, in this idea that there are three methods that we want to consider. And of course, in the analogy, it would be the bun, the meat, and the bottom bun. The top bun is really looking at the signal phrase, and the signal phrase is exactly what the term implies, a signal. A signal to your reader that you will have some outside sources that are about to be integrated. It's also signaling that some other person's words are about to come in. It also signals to prepare to process information in a very specific way. So we'll talk about the signal phrase here in a moment. The meat of the hamburger is, of course, one of the three methods that I just described. So that might include summary, direct quotation, or paraphrase. And each of those on its own will have its own methods of how you will integrate it. Nevertheless, they will still have some of the same characteristics. The bottom bun, of course, is the commentary, analysis, and explanation. And if you recall from the body paragraph discussion under the Texas format, we know that this is something that needs to be included regardless, right? So we need an explanation of the outside information that we need. That explanation can be further analysis. That explanation can be your commentary. Whatever the purpose is as to why you put that information in there is going to be included in that bottom bun aspect. So let's look at signal phrase first. So as I indicated before, a signal phrase helps to indicate to your reader that you are shifting your focus from your writing to another author's ideas. With this signal phrase, we are going to keep in mind that you want to focus on the verb. Okay, the verb is the action word. And we know that in our Canvas course shell, there is a link to a list of strong verbs that you might use in order to incorporate your outside source. But some of the verbs that come to mind as I engage in this lecture, which are things like argues, contends, underscores, highlights, depending on what the author does in their writing, that's what you should be communicating to your reader. So if, let's say, you are responding to a particular text and the author is in fact making a claim, so you might say something like the author claims. If you are reading a text or about to incorporate a text that simply explains, which is different than argue, then you might say the author explains. So based off the kind of verb that you decide to use, that's how we're going to know how you understood the text and also how you're going to communicate to your reader what they should know about those texts or ideas. Finally, the language matters, as I said before. So as an example for signal phrase, and I'm just going to show you and kind of jump ahead a moment, what a signal phrase might look like for a quotation, a paraphrase, and a summary. So for the first signal phrase, we have the CEO of Lighthouse Consulting predicts, quote, a year of exciting, challenging endeavors that will expand the company's horizons and stimulate growth throughout the company. We've just introduced a direct quotation, right? But what we also did is say what the CEO did or means by that. So they've created a prediction, right? Let's say we remove that signal phrase for a moment and all we have is a year of exciting, challenging endeavors. Well, as a reader, I wouldn't know how to process that information. What does that mean in the context of the writing? So we need to tell the reader that this was a prediction. Looking at the following one, we have a paraphrase. So we have, according to a recent survey from Pew Research Center, more than 50% of adults in the U.S. play video games, with 21% engaging in this activity on a daily basis. So what we're doing here is simply paraphrasing the recent survey that the Pew Research Center put out, right? We're not directly quoting the information. We're not using it word for word. We're simply just paraphrasing that info. And the fact that we said according to, okay, it's indicating to the reader that this belongs to them. This was a survey that was conducted by them and not information or common knowledge you possess. Finally, a signal phrase that introduces a summary. And as you know at this point, a summary is merely just that, a reiteration, right, or summarization of information that you read and sought out to either more likely for background information or for any other information in that regard. So here we have the nutritious, Young, and Robinson propose that, and then simply we give what the proposition is, okay? There's no analysis to it. There's no argumentative elements because we are simply stating what Young and Robinson proposed. As far as the meat is concerned, so the second layer, once we establish a signal phrase, then we need to make a choice, okay, about the kind of ways in which we're going to integrate that source. So the first type is summary. And as I said before, it's really going to be important for you to look at that beam model and recognize why you are incorporating this information. Now, more often than not, the summary is usually provided for background information, to demonstrate facts, or to just provide a context, right, for what you're about to discuss in that particular body paragraph, or for that matter, for the entire essay, depending on how you are using summary. Now, summary is a little bit more broad. It's an overview, as I said before, but you typically want to summarize mainly for background information or to describe knowledge that they're going to need in order to understand the material, as I said before, or if you want to single out one particular main idea. So there really isn't a whole lot of you can do with the summary. As I said before, it's merely just a recap or reiteration of something that you pulled from another text. Next, we have paraphrasing. So now we start getting into where you are now taking an active role in either analyzing, synthesizing, interpreting, mainly under the beam model, as I said before, for exhibits or for argumentative purposes. Okay, so with this, you will need to significantly change the wording of the author. Okay, so you cannot use things word for word here. You need to show how you are understanding the information in your own words, right? So be sure that you are clarifying the short passage. Be sure that you're avoiding to overuse quotations. Let's say that you want to vary the essay a little bit, and if you find that most of your essay is using direct quotations quite a bit, then maybe paraphrase might be the reason, or you actually use it. Another reason why we would use paraphrase is when we want to explain wording that isn't necessarily important, and not to say that it's not important for the sake of the paper, but something that you know that you can capture in your own words without losing the meaning or it getting lost in translation. Okay. Oftentimes when we paraphrase, it is for the main point of the passage, but as I said before, how you paraphrase should do the author's work justice. Okay, so be careful in that you're not paraphrasing incorrectly or understanding the material incorrectly, because you are now responsible for how you're going to convey the author's message through your own wording. Next, we have direct quotation. So a direct quotation is exact words from the author is copied directly from the source, word for word. It's indicated by quotation marks. Now, keep in mind that more often than not, when we incorporate directly quoted material, we often want to use that when we want to enhance or add the power of the author's words. So in other words, the author might use very unique phrases or wording that really captures the essence of what they're trying to communicate. And if you feel that putting it into your own words will not do it justice, then you would use a direct quotation. I would also say that using a direct quotation to disagree with the author's argument or to agree with it, for instance. So again, considering the beam model under argumentative, this is generally when we want to directly quote. So we want to make sure that if we are going to disagree with something, that we are capturing it exactly how they present that information, right? Sometimes we want to use direct quotation when we're comparing and contrasting specific points of view, because we want to show the reader the significant difference between what we're comparing or what we're contrasting. And then finally, of course, if there was information or research or work that is important in order to understand what you are talking about, then you might want to directly quote. Now, the direct quotation, is complex on its own as far as like how much can we directly quote in the paper. And again, be very, very careful that you're not just patching together quotations from different places and expecting it to be your writing. you have to have a reason, okay, why you're putting these direct quotations. And if it's not clear or evident in your writing, then it becomes obvious to your reader or instructor that you are relying on them to do the work for you. And it becomes painfully obvious when that happens, okay? But when we are using direct quotation specifically as far as how to integrate it, we generally will have a short one or a long or a block quotation, as we call it. Short quotes are in line with the text. These are fairly common. They're fewer than 40 words. If they are longer than that, then this is exactly how you will set it off. And I want to make a commentary about the block quotation. And again, generally we would only use those for much longer papers. We would also generally use those for much more complicated argumentative essays. So if you have a shorter essay, then you probably want to avoid using some of these block quotations. And again, the same principles apply. Why are you using such a long quote? Why is it going to be important for you to capture that? And that should be clear in how you integrate it through your signal phrase and also how you explain it after. So ultimately, your reader is watching. Why are you using that? And that should be clear for them. So here's what it might look like, the different ways to integrate it, incorporating those signal phrases, okay? So down at the bottom, you'll see an original passage, and, pause the video if you need to, but take a look at the passage, the original work, and then look up above and notice the two different ways, and this is using the short quote format, about how you can actually incorporate the text. So in the first one, we have the author's last name, and then we have states, and then we have the direct quotation here, the in-text citation, and the period after. If we don't want to use the author's name in the text, then of course we can just see it how you have it there, and then put the author's last name and then the page number in the text as well, okay? Now, these signal phrases, as I said before, this one is a general one, but again, you want to indicate to the reader exactly the significance of that quote. So if we say Randler states that late risers have, so, yes, they can state it, but if it was more powerful than that in their original writing, then maybe you want to say something like argues or whatever the other purpose is, it might be. And again, you'll have to determine that by reading through this text. What did they mean when they use that word within their own passage, okay? Next, you're going to look at paraphrase. So paraphrase, again, was using your own words, using the same passage. We can see that there are no direct quotations here as well. And then they paraphrase using their own words in these two different formats. So again, stop the video and take a moment to see how they did that, to see whether or not or how close they came to using similar words, and judge for yourself whether or not you think that was an effective use of paraphrase. Finally, we have summary. And again, as I said, summary is generally for background information or just to give a context for something. And here they have recent research shows that people who are not naturally early risers. So when they give this information, obviously what comes after is going to be incredibly important. And that's what we're going to talk about next, which is the bottom bread of the hamburger. So with that, we will include commentary, summary, analysis. We cannot just leave the ideas hanging, right? Because then we leave it up to the reader to make their own interpretation about why you use that particular quote. This is the most important part that I would argue, because this is where your ideas come in. This is what you have to say about all of it, why you're using it, how does it relate back, why is it relevant, how is it interesting, why is it significant? And again, consider the topic sentence, as we talked about in the body paragraph video, which is, what was your whole point for putting that in there, and what do you want to communicate to your reader as far as the message is concerned? So always having the topic sentence and thesis statement in mind as you engage in that bottom bread commentary, summary, analysis, and so forth, okay? As an example integration from beginning to end, and again, this is just a small example, you have Graffin, Birkenstein, and Durst believe that response templates can help students, quote, become active participants in the important conversations of the academic world. That is because response templates help students position their own arguments in relationship to the arguments of scholars and experts. With the help of templates, students don't just integrate sources, they enter conversation with their sources. And as we can see with the different parts here, right, we have our signal phrase that tells us what these authors believe can help students, and then they show us with their own information, right, how does it help students? Well, it helps by them becoming active participants. And then here's what you, the author, would say about it. Well, if it's helping students become active participants, then what do you have to say about that? Well, here's why. Because it helps students position their own argument in relationship to other ones. And this is important because, students don't just integrate sources, they participate in these conversations with their sources. And so if the whole point of your essay is to get that point across, then it did, because we have all of the parts that make that very clear to the reader. Now, as I said before, when we talk about integrating sources, it's not always easy. It does take practice. It does take time out for you to really understand, right, what the source material is saying. So before you can even get into all of this and how to integrate it, it's incredibly important for you to make sure that you are not only understanding what you're reading from these other information or material or text, but also taking the time to analyze it, interpret it, and then figure out why and how you are going to use that into your own paper using the B model's rhetorical methods. And once you start getting in the habit of doing that, then it becomes a lot easier when it comes time to write much larger essays. And of course, always keeping in mind the much larger purpose, which is, why am I needing to use this? And then how does it relate to my overall purpose / thesis for my essay? And how can I make it the most clear, most effective possible for my reader to understand the way that you are thinking, but moreover, the message that you're wanting to convey?